Thanks, Sophia, and thanks to the organizers for the opportunity to talk about this. They sort of challenged me with, okay, talk about technosignatures, and this is something about space. So I'm going to tell you about the possibility of finding technosignatures in space. It reflects discussions with many people. So thank you for all who have contributed to my education, essentially. So first off, the modern, if you will, the modern SETI era started with, you can sort of think about it as starting with this paper by Kokani and Morrison, in which they talk about searching for interstellar communications. And if you look at the paper carefully, they pull a fast one. So the title is Interstellar Communications, and they very quickly say community of intelligence. But arguably, there are other intelligent species on this planet. And in fact, if you just think about humans, modern humans have been around for 50,000 or more years, and we have had the capability for interstellar communications for a very small fraction of that. So we're not actually necessarily thinking about intelligence, we're thinking about capabilities for detection over interstellar distances. I think Natalia may have already hinted at this, Sophia. So this is, these are the atmospheres of the terrestrial planets in our own solar system, what you see if you pass sunlight through them. So essentially, planet passes in front of a star, you look at the light that emerges. The abscissa, the horizontal axis, is wavelength, or you can think of it as color. And you shouldn't need a PhD in astronomy to look at this atmosphere of Earth and recognize that it's somehow weird. It's different as compared to Venus and Mars. And that weirdness is because of the biology on the planet. So those trees out there, the Earth's atmosphere would not look like that, or the spectrum, the color of light that we see emerging from it would not look like that if it were not for biology. So when you hear people talk about biosignatures, signatures of biology, this is a prime example. This is the kind of stuff that people want to go do. Do you see weird atmospheres from extrasolar planets? Now, of course, this doesn't actually answer the question of what kind of biology. It could be algae. And indeed, for most of the Earth's history, the Earth has been populated by single-celled organisms. Complex organisms like us are relatively recent. So it doesn't tell us about algae versus zebras. And that's where technology, technosignatures comes in. So Sophia already mentioned several of these, radio waves, laser beacons, maybe megastructures. But technology is actually something that is also detectable over interstellar distances. Okay, now, the title of my talk started with a question, so you already think you know the answer by Betteridge's law of headlines. It starts with a question, therefore the answer is no. I'm going to attempt to convince you that at least it's maybe. And when I was given the talk title and I knew the context, it was like, okay, how would I actually think about answering this question or addressing this question? And I really think the solar system presents a lot of opportunities. So first, just as an existence proof, humanity has 5 spacecraft currently on interstellar trajectories. There's a concept under consideration in the Solar and Space Physics Decadal Survey called the Interstellar Probe, which, if recommended, would be a 6th one in the next several decades. So this is an existence proof that civilizations can send probes on interstellar trajectories. Now, none of these will be operational by the time they get to another star. That's an engineering detail. But at the very least, it's plausible to envision that civilizations can send out interstellar probes. This is not a new concept. So Ron Bracewell was talking about this or writing about this at least in the early 70s. And the idea goes way back. So I'm talking about stuff that is in some sense new. There have been attempts to redefine what SETI is. And there is even discussion in the literature about, well, this is part of the answer to the Fermi paradox. Okay, so when I started thinking about this, and I've talked about this in the past, I ended up constructing sort of a matrix, if you will. You can think about some kind of technology in the solar system, extraterrestrial technology in the solar system. It could be doing something or it could not. And it could be a probe, so in orbit, or it could actually be on the surface of a planetary body. And by planetary body here, I'm going to be a little bit fast and loose. It could be a planet, it could be a moon, it could be a small body like an asteroid or comet. I'm going to gloss over that. Because of time, I'm not going to talk about all these possibilities, but I'll give you a flavor of a couple of them, and I think you'll get the sense. Also, I'm a simple observer. Okay, I understand stuff where I can go make a measurement, I can go make an observation, and maybe figure something out. So I'm going to approach this very much from the perspective of what do we know and what could we know? I'm going to start, let's look at passive probes. So just something in orbit, not necessarily doing anything. This is a picture of, I believe it's an interstellar comet. So it's actually what the telescope was doing at the time was tracking the comet. Those streaks are actually stars. The comet's moving relative or differently than the stars. So the question becomes, suppose there was a probe in the solar system. Could we actually identify it? Could we find it, and then could we identify it? And that might very well be what a probe would look like at first blush. One thought is, well, we'll take a picture of it, or, if we can get somehow a close-up or a better resolution. So if it came really close, this is an example of a radar image of an asteroid. And you might say, aha, well, okay, maybe it will get something, it'll look way different than an asteroid. What would be, actually, the other really important way would be if we could get a spectrum. So this near-Earth asteroid here, 2020 SO, in fact, it had an interesting orbit. And some folks went out and got a spectrum of it and discovered that the spectrum looked very much like what you would get if you had sunlight reflecting off of white paint. And the reason it was already identified as potentially interesting was because it had an orbit that kind of suggested it might have been an old rocket booster. So in fact, 2020 SO, originally identified at one time as a near-Earth asteroid, is almost certainly one of these old rocket boosters, I think from the late 60s or early 70s. You might also ask the question, even if it looks like an asteroid, does that necessarily mean it's not a probe? So there's been discussion of, could you just hollow out an asteroid? We've got lots of them. Hollow it out and then send it out. And then maybe we're not at that level of technology, but others might be. And finally, of course, that's a close-up picture. I don't remember if that's Rigu or Bennu, but you could actually imagine going out and taking pictures of asteroids, sending spacecraft out to go take pictures of asteroids. That's a good thing to do. There might be planetary defense reasons to do it too. Mary already referred to these mega constellations, so the idea of actually sending out a fleet of small spacecraft to asteroids would be, I think, a fantastic idea. There is a bit of a numbers game, right? People have talked about, well, let's go visit 100 asteroids. And as I'm about to tell you, there are plausibly millions in the solar system. So there's a bit of a numbers game. Let's also think about, just from the concept of what could we know? So let's go big. Let's envision somebody's got a solar sail, a probe with a big solar sail on it somewhere in the solar system. I'm a physicist sometimes, so I'm going to treat the spherical cow problem. I'm going to assume it's 100% reflective. Let's put it out 5 AU, say somewhere out in the orbit around Jupiter. If I've done the numbers correctly, this thing would look to be something like a 19.5 apparent visual magnitude if it had a 1 square kilometer surface area. So 1 kilometer by 1 kilometer solar sail. We've actually kind of, I think we've done something like 100 square meters or so of solar sail. It's not that far away from the kind of technology we could do. So 19.5 magnitude. That's actually pretty easy to detect. That's not a detection problem. So when the Vera Rubin Observatory's legacy survey of space and time gets cranking, the last time I looked at the projections, they're going to find something like 1 million main belt asteroids at about this brightness or brighter. This is not a detection problem, this is an identification problem. Why is that particular speck of light in the sky more interesting than the 100,000 other, Jupiter Trojans that we might find, or 1 million other main belt asteroids? What makes it interesting? So now let's switch gears to think about stuff on the surface of a planetary body. It's not doing anything particularly. We have existence proofs of these. So on the moon, and Hector already showed some examples of this. This is Apollo 15 landing site. And again, you shouldn't need a PhD in astronomy to recognize there's some interesting looking stuff on the surface of the moon there. And that is, of course, the tracks that were left by the astronauts and the rover that they were driving. Similarly, on the surface of Mars, there are technosignatures. We have a couple of rovers roving around, and then the various what is now debris associated with getting them safely to the surface of Mars. So we actually have existence proofs. And Hector already mentioned, there's the Lunar Reconnaissance Orbiter. You could actually go imagine we have the capability to take pictures of essentially the entire surface of the moon, or you could envision doing that. So let's just go look at the entire surface of the moon, and maybe we'll find more such examples. There is, again, a small numbers problem. Lunar Reconnaissance Orbiter at its best provides something like 0.5 meter to meter scale resolution. You sort of look at the size of the moon and you have only something like 72 trillion pixels to examine. Maybe that's a nice summer student project. But the other way is to draw in machine learning. So the left panel is the picture I've already shown you. The right is a saliency that was done by some data scientists at JPL of this image. And you can start to, so saliency is some measure of how different pixels look relative to other pixels. And you can sort of start to see, let's see, this thing up here. So that's the Apollo Lunar Surface Experiment Package or Exploration Package, ALSAP. And you can start to see, well, gee, that kind of maybe stands out. And so now instead of a 72 trillion pixel problem, maybe we've reduced it down to only 100,000 or something. There's still a bit of an issue, right? So I think, let's see, that's the, let's see, which one? That one's the lander. So you sort of have to distinguish it from certain kinds of craters, but at least you've reduced the problem substantially. I do want to point out, machine learning is not a black box, so it requires a very careful collaboration between the data scientists who put these algorithms together and the people with the domain knowledge, the astronomers, the planetary scientists, who know which kind of pixels are actually worth paying attention to, or what are the features, what am I looking for in the first place. And you know, we're certainly not at the stage in which we can pick up a computer mouse and say, computer, find me all the technosignatures on the planet. It's much more detailed than that, and otherwise we're going to end up with the garbage in, garbage out problem. Let's see, the other sort of, if you will, editorial comment about this is a good thing to do, period. So even if we don't find technosignatures, we plausibly will make discoveries about planetary science. And this sort of harkens back, Jason Wright likes to refer to Freeman Dyson's first law of SETI searches. If you're gonna go out and do a SETI search, design it so that you find something interesting, even if it isn't a technosignature. So this is a lunar pit. It is almost certainly the part of a lava tube or a cave that has collapsed, so you're looking into a lava tube. My understanding is these were found either serendipitously or somewhat serendipitously. People did not, the mission did not initially go looking for these, although there were perhaps hints already that they might exist. So examining planetary surfaces is a good thing just because it's good for planetary science, and even if we don't find technosignatures, it's a good thing to do. And as part of this, I started going through, I think this is up to date, I tried to do a bit of a census of how well do we know our own solar system. So this is a measure of how well have we actually imaged the surface of various planetary bodies. And in some cases, the moon and Mars, at least over some maybe small fraction, we've done reasonably well. But in many other parts of the solar system, you can see we've done actually a kind of poor job. Plausibly there could be a 100-meter scale technosignature sitting someplace in the solar system, and we would know it's there because we don't have enough imagery to actually detect it. I mean, it's a kind of a sobering thought, right? The solar system is really big, and we haven't really explored that much of it. There's also a bit of a cautionary note, and I can't remember if Hector sort of alluded to this, but there's a great scene in The Martian. I won't ruin it for you, but I think when Mark Watney was finding Pathfinder, and Jason Wright has written this really nice paper on prior indigenous species of just how long would technosignatures last on a planetary surface, and even on a relatively inert surface like the moon, and certainly Mars at least has something like weather. It's potentially not billions of years, so there's some time frame over which we could actually make such a detection. Okay, so that's the solar system. Let me make a few comments, though, about space telescopes, actually sending telescopes into space for technosignatures or finding technosignatures. And again, some of this will either echo or complement what Hector described already. So I've already shown you this, and I think Natalia referred to this Habitable Worlds Observatory. So this is a big deal. Okay, this is NASA, ESA, probably Canada, international space agencies are gearing up, are starting to move forward on this Habitable Worlds Observatory. Think 6 meters. So 6 meters, if I did the pacing right, where we get our coffee, that atrium area is something of order 6 meters. So the James Webb Space Telescope mirror would fill something like that entire room. Habitable Worlds Observatory is going to be at least that scale. NASA and its partners are probably going to spend $10+ billion over the next 20 years trying to do this. And you can see this quote is from the Astronomy and Astrophysics Decadal Survey, something like a couple of dozen potentially habitable worlds near our own in the local solar neighborhood. That's becoming interesting from a technosignature standpoint as well. So in the literature already, Thomas Beatty has taken a look at, this is actually a picture of the Earth at night, so those city lights. Could you detect the city lights from another civilization, another planet orbiting another star? And habitable worlds is, I think, a little bit on the edge of whether it could or not. If we went a little bit bigger, it becomes plausible that you could actually see the nighttime city lights on a nearby extrasolar planet if, in fact, there's a if there's another civilization. Very recently, I think this was earlier this month, Jaswell took a look at so-called specular reflections. Sea glint is an example of that. If you have a big shiny surface, maybe say a field of solar panels, and you get the phasing just right, you get a bright reflection. And again, it's plausible that you could detect this stuff over interstellar distances with the kind of telescopes that we're starting to talk about building. And it's, we potentially are gonna find this stuff whether we go looking for it or not. I think, I can't remember if Hector talked about far infrared, the waste heat. That's another example. The NASA's gearing up to potentially, possibly, do some kind of far infrared space telescope, which could be a fantastic technosignature telescope, even if it's not intended to do that. And then finally, there's a disruptive technology that's potentially sitting out there. So this is Starship, and there are other, Blue Origins has a similar heavy lift vehicle. Martin Elvis, Charles Lawrence, and Sarah Seeger had this very nice paper or piece in Physics Today earlier this year about the kinds of really big telescopes that this kind of rocket would make possible. So if JWST fills that atrium, you can start thinking about a mirror that fills this room being launched by a rocket such as that. They talk about the astronomy and astrophysics possibilities, but you could also envision, what kind of probe could you send into the solar system? What kind of new exploration of the solar system, or maybe fleets of spacecraft could you pack into one of these things? And so the question I think is really not going to be a technological one. The question is going to be almost pseudo-political of, are we poor scientists going to be able to get into the queue for one of these things or a couple of these things to start envisioning launching mirrors that are this size or bigger? Okay, so I think in the final 30 seconds, this is what I've told you. The solar system's big. We haven't really done a good job of exploring it yet. There's lots to discover even within our own solar system, possibly technosignatures. And we have to take seriously the possibility that we're going to find them with the kind of telescopes that we're building or envisioning building. And so, let's continue to explore, and there are lots of opportunities out there. Thanks.